A bull goes crazy when he sees this girl. The reason shocked his owner. The scorching Texas sun beat down on the Houston rodeo arena where crowds gathered in anticipation of the day's events. Among the bustling throngs, one man stood out, John Hawkins, a towering figure with weathered hands and eyes that sparkled with pride. His gaze was fixed on the holding pen, where his prized possession, Thunder, a majestic black bull with a reputation for unparalleled tranquility, waited patiently. "You ready for this, big guy?" John murmured, reaching out to stroke Thunder's glossy coat. The bull's dark eyes met his, a silent understanding passing between them. For years, Thunder had been the talk of the rodeo circuit, not for his ferocity, but for his remarkable calm. No rider had ever been thrown, no handler ever gored. Thunder was a gentle giant, a paradox in the world of bull riding. As John made his final preparations, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about today. The air seemed charged with an electric anticipation that went beyond the usual pre-show jitters. Little did he know that fate was about to throw him the ride of his life. In the stands, a figure slipped through the crowd, her face hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn cowboy hat. Emily Rodriguez moved with purpose, her heart pounding in her chest. She had waited years for this moment, and now that it was here, she could barely contain her emotions. Her eyes scanned the arena until they locked onto Thunder's imposing form. "I've found you," she whispered, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I've finally found you." As the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, introducing John and Thunder, Emily's hand tightened around the locket hanging from her neck. Inside was a photo of a young girl and a black bull calf, a memory of a life long past but never forgotten. The crowd cheered as John led Thunder into the arena. The bull moved with a grace that belied his size, his steps measured and calm. But as they neared the center, something changed. Thunder's ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring. John felt the shift immediately, a tension rippling through the bull's powerful muscles. "Easy, boy," John soothed, but his words fell on deaf ears. Thunder's gaze was fixed on a point in the stands, and before John could react, the unthinkable happened. With a bellow that shook the arena, Thunder reared up, easily clearing the fence that separated him from the crowd. Screams erupted as people scrambled to get out of the way, but one figure stood her ground. Emily raised her hand, her eyes locked with Thunder's as the massive bull charged towards her. John watched in horror, certain he was about to witness a tragedy. But instead of trampling Emily, Thunder skidded to a stop before her, lowering his head with a gentleness that defied belief. Without hesitation, Emily vaulted onto Thunder's back, her movements fluid and practiced. "Yah!" she cried, and Thunder responded instantly, wheeling around and galloping towards the arena exit. Security guards moved to block their path, but Thunder easily outmaneuvered them, bursting through the gates and out into the streets of Houston. As the dust settled, John stood in shocked silence, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His prized bull, the gentlest creature he had ever known, had just staged a jailbreak with a mysterious woman. As sirens began to wail in the distance, John knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. The Houston Police Department was in chaos. Reports flooded in from all corners of the city, each more unbelievable than the last. A bull and its rider tearing through downtown traffic. A woman on a bull ordering drive-through at a fast food restaurant. An impromptu rodeo show in the middle of a public park. Detective Sarah Martinez pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to make sense of it all. In her 15 years on the force, she'd never encountered anything quite like this. "All right, people," she addressed her team. "I want every available unit on this. Find that bull and the woman riding it. And somebody get me John Hawkins." Across town, John was already 2 steps ahead of the police. He'd jumped into his pickup truck the moment Thunder and the mysterious woman had disappeared, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? How had she known Thunder? And most importantly, where were they going? As he navigated the busy streets, following the trail of bewildered onlookers and knocked-over trash cans, John's phone rang. It was his sister, Grace. "John, are you okay? I just saw the news. What on earth is going on? John sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. I wish I knew, Grace. Thunder's gone. Some woman just took him. It's like they knew each other. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Grace spoke again, her voice was hesitant. John, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Thunder's past. John's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I've had Thunder since he was a calf. That's just it, Grace replied. You didn't. Do you remember that summer, about 5 years ago, when you were in that terrible accident? You were in a coma for weeks. The memory sent a chill down John's spine. He'd nearly died in that accident, and the recovery had been long and painful. Of course I remember. What does that have to do with Thunder? Everything, Grace said softly. John, Thunder wasn't born on our ranch. When you woke up, you were so devastated about losing your previous bull that I bought Thunder from a broker. I thought it would help you recover, give you something to focus on. John felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. You're telling me Thunder isn't really mine? Legally, he is, Grace assured him. But his origins, John, I never looked too closely into where he came from. I was just so desperate to help you. As Grace's words sank in, a memory stirred in John's mind. The day he'd first seen Thunder, still groggy from his long hospital stay, the instant connection he'd felt with the bull, as if they were kindred spirits. Had that all been a lie? I've got to go, John said abruptly, ending the call. His mind was reeling, but he forced himself to focus. Whatever Thunder's true origins were, one thing hadn't changed. John cared for that bull more than anything in the world, and he was going to find him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, John found himself on the outskirts of Houston. The reports had led him here, to a maze of old farm roads and abandoned properties. It was as he turned down a particularly overgrown lane that he saw it, a flash of movement in an old, dilapidated barn. John's heart raced as he pulled up to the barn. The door was ajar, and he could hear soft murmuring from inside. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. There, in the fading light, stood Thunder. The massive bull was as calm as ever, his head lowered as the woman, Emily, John now knew her name thanks to the police reports, gently stroked his nose. She looked up as John entered, her eyes wary but determined. I suppose you've come to take him back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. John took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I've come to understand, he replied. Please, tell me who you are and how you know Thunder. Emily's hand moved to the locket around her neck, and for a moment, John thought she might bolt. But then she squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with a fierceness that took him aback. My name is Emily Rodriguez, she said, and Thunder, the bull you call Thunder, his real name is Storm. He was born right here, on this very farm, and he was never meant to leave. As the last light of day faded, John realized he was standing on the precipice of a truth that would change everything he thought he knew. The real story of Thunder, of Storm, was about to unfold, and John wasn't sure if he was ready for what he was about to hear. The old barn creaked and groaned, as if awakening from a long slumber to bear witness to the unfolding drama. John stood rooted to the spot, his eyes darting between Emily and Thunder. No, Storm, as he tried to process what he'd just heard. I don't understand, he finally managed. This farm, it looks abandoned. How could Thunder, Storm, have been born here? Emily's hand never left the bull's broad neck as she spoke. 5 years ago, this wasn't an abandoned farm. It was home, my mother's home, and Storm's home. As if on cue, Storm let out a low, mournful bellow that seemed to shake the very foundations of the barn. Emily closed her eyes, drawing strength from the sound. My mother, Maria Rodriguez, was a bull breeder, she continued, but not just any bulls. She specialized in breeding for temperament, creating bulls that were strong but gentle. Storm was her crowning achievement. John's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he thought he knew about his beloved bull. But how? Why? Emily's eyes flashed with a mixture of pain and anger. Why did he end up with you? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it, Mr. Hawkins? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. My mother died suddenly 5 years ago. I was away at college when it happened. By the time I got back, the farm had been sold, the animals dispersed, all except for Storm. He had disappeared without a trace. John felt a cold dread settling in the pit of his stomach. Emily, I swear to you, I had no idea. I was in an accident around that time. My sister, she bought Thunder, Storm, for me while I was recovering. Emily's expression softened slightly. I believe you, Mr. Hawkins. You're not the villain in this story, but someone is. Someone who took advantage of my mother's death to steal Storm and sell him for profit. As the gravity of the situation sank in, John found himself moving closer, drawn by the pain in Emily's voice. Tell me everything, he said softly. Please, I need to know the truth. And so, as night fell over the old farm, Emily began her tale. She spoke of growing up on the farm, of the special bond she'd formed with Storm from the moment he was born. She described her mother's pioneering work in bull breeding and the jealousy it had sparked in some of their competitors. Storm was special from the start, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. Mum always said he had an old soul. When I left for college, it broke my heart to say goodbye to him. I never imagined it would be the last time I'd see him or my mother alive. As Emily's story unfolded, John felt a mix of emotions churning within him. Guilt at having unknowingly benefited from Emily's loss, anger at the injustice of it all, and a growing sense of determination to make things right. The police investigated my mother's death, Emily continued, but they ruled it an accident, a fall in the barn, but I never believed it. And when Storm disappeared, I knew something wasn't right. John's detective instincts, honed from years of working with law enforcement at rodeos, kicked into high gear. Found the broker my sister bought Storm from. Do you think they might be connected to what happened here? Emily nodded grimly. It's the only lead I've had in 5 years. I've been searching, Mr. Hawkins, searching for Storm, searching for answers. When I saw the announcements for today's rodeo, saw Storm's picture, I knew I had to act. As the full weight of Emily's journey settled over them, a heavy silence filled the barn. Storm, sensing the tension, even though it might mean losing Storm. John looked at the bull, the gentle giant who had been his companion and source of strength for the past 5 years. He thought of the joy Storm had brought him, the healing he'd facilitated, and he knew, with absolute certainty, what he had to do. Storm was never truly mine, he said softly. But that doesn't mean I don't love him. And it doesn't mean I won't fight like hell to make sure he and you get the justice you deserve. As John's words hung in the air, a new energy seemed to fill the old barn. The unlikely trio, a rodeo star, a determined young woman, and a bull with an extraordinary past, stood united, ready to unravel the mystery that had brought them together. Little did they know, the journey ahead would test their resolve in ways they could never have imagined. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, the stage was set for a tale of loyalty, justice, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals that would shake the foundations of the rodeo world. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. John, using his connections in the rodeo circuit, began discreetly inquiring about the broker who had sold Storm to his sister, Emily. Armed with her mother's old records and a determination that burned like wildfire, pored over financial documents and correspondence, searching for any clue that might shed light on the events surrounding her mother's death and Storm's disappearance. They had moved their base of operations to John's ranch, where Storm was safely hidden away in a secluded pasture. The media frenzy surrounding the Houston Bull escapade had begun to die down, but John and Emily knew they couldn't let their guard down. Whoever was behind the original theft of Storm might still be out there, and the stakes were too high to take any chances. It was on the 3rd day of their investigation that they got their first real break. John's sister, Grace, had managed to track down the name of the broker, Marcus Delgado. Delgado, Emily breathed, her eyes widening as John showed her the information. I know that name. He used to come around the farm sometimes, trying to convince my mother to sell her bulls. She always refused. John's brow furrowed. You think he might have had something to do with what happened? Emily nodded grimly. It's too much of a coincidence. We need to find him, John. He's the key to all of this. But finding Marcus Delgado proved to be easier said than done. The man seemed to have vanished into thin air, his last known address a dead end. It wasn't until John called in a favor from an old rodeo buddy turned private investigator that they got their next lead. Delgado's been spotted in San Antonio, John announced, hanging up the phone. Word is he's trying to broker a deal for a new line of gentle as bulls. Sound familiar? Emily's face hardened. He's using my mother's research, her life's work. We have to stop him. As they prepared to leave for San Antonio, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Detective Sarah Martinez, the officer who had been in charge of the bull theft case, stood on John's porch, her expression a mix of frustration and curiosity. Mr. Hawkins, she said, her eyes scanning the property, I think it's time you and I had a chat about what really happened at that rodeo. For a moment, John considered lying, spinning some tale to throw the detective off their trail. But as he met Sarah's steady gaze, he made a split-second decision that would alter the course of their investigation. Detective, he said, opening the door wider, I think you'd better come in. There's someone you need to meet. As John introduced Sarah to Emily and explained the true story behind Storm's dramatic escape, he could see the detective's professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern. This is bigger than a stolen bull, Sarah said, shaking her head in disbelief. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at fraud, possibly even murder. I want in. With Detective Martinez now part of their unlikely team, the group set off for San Antonio, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Emily, her hand never far from the locket containing the picture of her mother, steeled herself. The sprawling cityscape of San Antonio unfolded before them as John's truck rolled into town. Emily nervously fidgeting with her locket in the passenger seat. Detective Martinez followed close behind in her unmarked police car, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the high stakes they faced. Their first stop was a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of the city, where John's private investigator friend had tracked Marcus Delgado's last known whereabouts. As they pulled into the parking lot, the tension in the air was palpable. Remember, Detective Martinez cautioned as they gathered outside their vehicles, we're here to gather information, not confront anyone. We need solid evidence before we can make any moves. Emily nodded, though John could see the barely contained anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, silently promising that justice would be served. The motel manager, a weary-looking man with thinning hair, eyed them suspiciously as they approached the front desk. It took some smooth talking from John and a flash of Detective Martinez's badge before he reluctantly confirmed that yes, Marcus Delgado had been staying there, but had checked out just that morning. Said he was headed to some big ranchers' conference at the convention center, the manager added, clearly eager to be rid of them. Seemed in a hurry, if you ask me. As they left the motel, Emily's frustration boiled over. We're too late. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now, selling off more of my mother's work. But John's eyes gleamed with a sudden idea. Maybe not, he said, pulling out his phone. The San Antonio Livestock Show is happening this week at the convention center. If Delgado is trying to broker deals for these bulls, that's where he'll be. Detective Martinez nodded approvingly. Good thinking, Hawkins. We can blend in with the crowd, do some reconnaissance without tipping our hand. The convention center was a hive of activity, filled with ranchers, livestock buyers, and industry representatives from all over Texas and beyond. John, Emily, and Detective Martinez split up, each taking a section of the vast exhibition hall to search for any sign of Marcus Delgado. It was Emily who spotted him first, her heart nearly stopping as she saw the man who had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. Delgado stood at a sleek booth, animatedly talking to a group of interested buyers. Behind him, a large banner proclaimed, "Gentle Giant Genetics, the future of rodeo bulls." Fighting back waves of nausea, Emily pretended to be interested in a nearby booth while straining to hear Delgado's pitch. Revolutionary breeding program, Delgado was saying, his voice smooth as oil. Bulls with all the power you need for a great show, but with a temperament that makes them safe and easy to handle. It's the best of both worlds, gentlemen. Emily's hands clenched into fists as she realized he was selling a twisted version of her mother's life's work. She was so focused on Delgado that she almost missed the conversation happening just behind her. "I don't know, Marcus," a gruff voice was saying. "This all sounds a little too good to be true. Where did this breeding program come from all of a sudden?" Emily froze, hardly daring to breathe as she listened to Delgado's response. "Let's just say I acquired it from a breeder who no longer had use for it," Delgado replied, a hint of smugness in his tone. "Trust me, Frank, this is the real deal. I've got a demonstration set up at the Alvarez Ranch tomorrow morning. Come see for yourself." As the men moved away, Emily fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. She had to let John and Detective Martinez know what she'd overheard. This could be the break they'd been waiting for. But as she turned to leave, she found her path blocked by a towering figure. Looking up, she found herself staring into the cold, calculating eyes of Marcus Delgado. "Well, well," he said, his voice sending chills down Emily's spine. "Emily Rodriguez, it's been a long time. You've certainly grown up since I last saw you." Emily's mind raced, searching for a way out of this dangerous situation. But before she could speak, she felt a strong hand on her shoulder. John had appeared as if from nowhere, his presence solid and reassuring. "Is there a problem here?" John asked, his voice deceptively calm. Delgado's eyes narrowed as he assessed this new player. "Not at all," he said smoothly. "Just catching up with an old acquaintance. Emily, dear, why don't you and your friend join me for a drink? We have so much to talk about." The invitation hung in the air like a poisoned apple. Emily and John exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication passing between them. They both knew that this could be their chance to get the information they needed, but it could also be walking straight into the lion's den. As Detective Martinez watched from across the room, her hand never far from her concealed weapon, Emily took a deep breath and made her decision. "I would be delighted, Mr. Delgado," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think it's high time we had a proper conversation about the past and the future." With Delgado leading the way, Emily and John followed him towards the convention center's upscale bar. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but the picture they formed was more dangerous than any of them had imagined. As they stepped into the dimly lit bar, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap from which there might be no escape. The upscale bar of the convention center was a stark contrast to the bustling exhibition halls they had just left. Soft jazz played in the background as Marcus Delgado led John and Emily to a secluded booth in the corner. Detective Martinez, maintaining her cover, took a seat at the bar, close enough to overhear, but far enough not to arouse suspicion. As they settled into the plush leather seats, a tense silence fell over the group. Delgado, ever the smooth operator, signaled for a waiter and ordered a round of drinks without bothering to consult his companions. "So, Emily," Delgado began, his voice dripping with false warmth. "It's been, what, 5 years? You've grown into quite the beautiful young woman. Your mother would be proud." Emily's jaw clenched at the mention of her mother, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Thank you, Mr. Delgado, I'm sure she would be, though I can't help but wonder what she'd think of how her life's work is being used these days." Delgado's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Ah, so that's what this is about. You know, Emily, your mother had some brilliant ideas, but she lacked the vision to truly capitalize on them. I'm simply fulfilling the potential she left untapped." John, who had been silently assessing the situation, finally spoke up. "And how exactly did you come to be in possession of Mrs. Rodriguez's research, Mr. Delgado? From what I understand, it wasn't exactly up for sale." A dangerous glint appeared in Delgado's eyes. "Mr. Hawkins, isn't it? The famous bull rider. I must say, I was quite impressed with your handling of Thunder, or should I say Storm." He leaned back, swirling his drink. "It's funny how things work out. Isn't it? One man's loss is another man's gain." Emily felt her blood boil at Delgado's casual admission. "You stole him?" she hissed. "You stole Storm and my mother's research, And I bet you had something to do with her death too. The atmosphere at the table suddenly became charged with tension. Delgado's facade of geniality dropped, replaced by a cold, calculated stare. That's a very serious accusation, Miss Rodriguez. I'd be careful about throwing around such inflammatory statements. John, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, placed a calming hand on Emily's arm. Mr. Delgado, he said, his voice level, I think we all want the same thing here, to see this remarkable breeding program reach its full potential. Why don't you tell us more about your plans? Maybe we could work together. For a moment, Delgado studied John intently, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. You know, Hawkins, I like the way you think. In fact, I have a proposition for both of you. As Delgado launched into his pitch, Emily and John exchanged a quick glance. They were walking a dangerous line, but if they played their cards right, they might just get the evidence they needed. I'm hosting a private demonstration tomorrow at the Alvarez Ranch, Delgado explained. A select group of investors will be there to see these bulls in action. Emily, with your intimate knowledge of the breeding program, and John, with your rodeo expertise, well, let's just say your involvement could be very lucrative for all of us. Emily's mind raced. This was their chance to gather concrete evidence of Delgado's illegal activities, but it was also incredibly risky. She opened her mouth to respond, but John beat her to it. It sounds intriguing, Mr. Delgado, he said smoothly. We'd be very interested in attending this demonstration, wouldn't we, Emily? Caught off guard, Emily could only nod. Delgado's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you the details, but remember, this is a very exclusive event. No uninvited guests. His gaze flickered briefly towards Detective Martinez at the bar. As they stood to leave, Delgado gripped Emily's arm, pulling her close. It really is good to see you, Emily, he murmured. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. It's just a shame she's not here to see it. The thinly veiled threat sent a shiver down Emily's spine. As they walked away from the table, she felt as though she had just danced with the devil himself. Outside the bar, they regrouped with Detective Martinez. I heard everything, she said in a low voice. This is big. If we can get solid evidence at that demonstration tomorrow, we can bring Delgado down for good. John nodded grimly. But we'll have to be careful. Delgado's no fool. He'll be watching us like a hawk. As they made their way back to their hotel, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. They were so close to uncovering the truth, to getting justice for her mother and for Storm. But at what cost? The danger was real, and growing with every step they took. That night, as she lay awake in her hotel room, Emily clutched her locket tightly. I'm closest, Mom, she whispered into the darkness. I promise I'll make this right, no matter what it takes. Little did she know, the events of the next day would test that promise in ways she could never have imagined. As dawn broke over San Antonio, the stage was set for a showdown that would change all of their lives forever. The morning of the demonstration dawned bright and clear, the Texas sun already promising another scorching day. Emily stood before the mirror in her hotel room, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The woman who looked back at her was a far cry from the carefree girl who had left for college 5 years ago. Her eyes held a determination born of loss and fueled by the pursuit of justice. John knocked softly on her door. You ready? He asked as she opened it, his voice gentle but tinged with concern. Emily nodded. As they pulled up to the gate, Emily's heart hammered in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The ranch was impressive, a sprawling complex of modern buildings nestled among traditional barns and corrals. A small group of well-dressed individuals milled about near a large arena, sipping coffee and chatting amiably. Marcus Delgado stood at the center, holding court like a king among his subjects. Ah, John, Emily, so glad you could make it, Delgado called out as they approached, his voice dripping with false warmth. Come, let me introduce you to some of our potential investors. As Delgado led them through the crowd, making introductions, Emily's eyes scanned the area, taking in every detail. She noticed a large barn off to the side, heavily guarded. Something told her that's where the real action was happening. The demonstration began with Delgado giving a polished presentation about the Gentle Giant Genetics program. Emily felt sick as she listened to him twist her mother's research into something unrecognizable, a perversion of everything Maria Rodriguez had stood for. And now, Delgado announced with a flourish, the moment you've all been waiting for. Gentlemen, prepare to witness the future of rodeo. At his signal, the doors to the guarded barn swung open. Emily's breath caught in her throat as a magnificent bull emerged, its coat gleaming in the sunlight. But something was off. The bull's eyes seemed glazed, its movements almost mechanical. As a rider mounted the bull and the chute opened, Emily's suspicions were confirmed. The bull bucked and spun, putting on an impressive show, but there was no spirit in its movements. It was as if the animal was simply going through the motions, devoid of its natural fire. "They've drugged them," Emily whispered to John, horror evident in her voice. "This isn't gentle breeding, it's abuse." John's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with anger. "We need proof," he muttered back. "Can you get close to that barn?" Emily nodded, her heart racing. As the crowd's attention was focused on the arena, she slipped away, making her way towards the heavily guarded structure. Using every ounce of stealth she possessed, she managed to peek through a crack in the wall. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. Rows of bulls, all in various states of sedation. Vials of drugs lined shelves along the walls. And there, in a corner, was a familiar face that made her heart leap. Storm. Fumbling for her phone, Emily quickly snapped a series of photos, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. But as she turned to leave, she found her path blocked by a towering figure. "Now, Tanas Emily," Delgado's voice was like ice. "Didn't anyone ever tell you it's rude to snoop?" Before she could react, strong hands grabbed her from behind. Emily struggled, but it was no use. As she was dragged back towards the main group, she saw John being similarly restrained. Delgado addressed the gathered investors, his mask of civility now completely gone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a slight change of plans. It seems we have some uninvited guests who are very interested in our operation." Emily's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. But as she looked around at the faces of the investors, faces that showed more annoyance at the interruption than concern for the illegal activities they'd just witnessed, she realized with a sinking heart that they were all in on it. Just when all seemed lost, a commotion erupted from the barn. The sound of splintering wood filled the air, followed by a bellow that Emily would have recognized anywhere. Storm burst from the barn, his eyes clear and wild, every inch the majestic bull she remembered from her youth. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. John, seizing the moment of distraction, broke free from his captors and rushed to Emily's aid. Delgado, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him, made a desperate break for his nearby helicopter. And Storm, as if guided by some unseen force, charged directly at Delgado. The bull's massive form collided with the would-be escapee just as he reached the helicopter's door, sending him sprawling to the ground. As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. Detective Martinez burst onto the scene with a team of officers, quickly taking control of the situation. Delgado and his associates were rounded up, the evidence of their crimes now undeniable. In the midst of the chaos, Emily found herself standing face to face with Storm. The bull's dark eyes met hers, and in that moment, all the years of separation melted away. She reached out a trembling hand, and Storm lowered his massive head to meet her touch. "It's over," John said softly, coming to stand beside her. "We did it." Emily stood there, her hand resting on Storm's broad forehead, tears streaming down her face. The chaos around them seemed to fade away as she reunited with the bull she had loved since childhood. John stood beside her, a steady presence in the storm of emotions. Detective Martinez approached them, a look of satisfaction on her face. "We've got them," she said. "Delgado and his associates are in custody, and we've seized all the evidence. It's over." But even as relief washed over Emily, a new worry gnawed at her. "What about the bulls?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's going to happen to them?" John squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. We'll make sure they're taken care of, Emily. I promise." As if on cue, a familiar voice called out from the crowd of officers and confused investors. Emily Rodriguez?" Emily turned, her eyes widening in recognition. "Dr. Ramirez." The older man pushed his way through the crowd, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "I thought that was you. My God, girl. You've grown up." Dr. Ramirez had been her mother's veterinarian and friend, a constant presence on their farm when Emily was growing up. Seeing him here, now, felt like a lifeline to her past. "Dr. Ramirez, what are you doing here?" Emily asked, confusion evident in her voice. The old vet's eyes twinkled. "I got a call from a Detective Martinez, said there might be some bulls in need of my expertise. Now I see why." He looked around at the chaos, shaking his head. "Maria would be proud of you, Emily. You've uncovered something big here." As Dr. Ramirez began examining the bulls, ensuring they were unharmed from their ordeal, Emily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. With the doctor's help, she knew the bulls would be in good hands. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and a flurry of media attention. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Alvarez ranch, Emily felt exhausted, but triumphant. She stood with John and Detective Martinez watching as the last of the police vehicles pulled away. Storm had been loaded into a trailer, along with the other bulls, bound for a sanctuary where they would receive proper care until more permanent arrangements could be made. "So what happens now?" John asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Detective Martinez smiled. "Now, we build our case. With the evidence we've gathered and your testimonies, Delgado and his associates are looking at some serious jail time. Not just for the animal abuse, but for fraud, theft, and..." She paused, looking at Emily. "We're reopening the investigation into your mother's death, Emily. If Delgado had anything to do with it, we'll find out." Emily nodded, a mix of emotions swirling within her. The possibility of finally knowing the truth about her mother's death was both terrifying and liberating. "And what about you two?" the detective continued. "Any plans?" John and Emily exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. "I think," John said slowly, "that we've got a bull breeding program to resurrect, the right way this time." Emily felt a surge of hope at his words. "You mean..." John grinned. "Well, I've got a pretty nice ranch back home, and it seems to me that Storm and his buddies are going to need somewhere to live. Plus, I could use an expert in gentle bull breeding. What do you say, Emily?" Partners. Emily's heart soared at the prospect, a chance to continue her mother's work, to make things right. And perhaps, she thought as she looked at John, a chance for something more. "Partners," she agreed, her voice strong and sure. As they drove away from the Alvarez ranch, Emily felt as though she was leaving behind more than just the scene of their triumph. She was leaving behind the pain and uncertainty of the past 5 years, driving towards a future full of promise. In the rearview mirror, she could see Storm's trailer following behind them, and she smiled. They had a long road ahead, full of challenges and hard work, but for the first time in years, Emily felt ready to face whatever came their way. The sun dipped below the horizon as they drove, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the landscape roll by. She thought of her mother, of Storm, of the unexpected ally she'd found in John. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Emily made a silent vow. She would honor her mother's memory not just by continuing her work, but by living her life with the same passion and integrity that Maria Rodriguez had embodied. The road stretched out before them, full of possibility, and as John reached over to give her hand a reassuring squeeze, Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't have to face them alone. 6 months had passed since the dramatic events at Alvarez Ranch, and life had taken on a new rhythm for Emily and John. The sprawling Hawkins Ranch, once known primarily for its champion rodeo bulls, was now home to a revolutionary breeding program that was quickly gaining attention in the livestock world. Emily stood at the fence of the main paddock, watching as Storm grazed peacefully alongside a small herd of cows. The big bull had adjusted well to his new life, his gentle nature making him the perfect ambassador for their program. "Penny, for your thoughts?" John's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. Emily turned keen, a smile lighting up her face. "Just thinking about how far we've come, sometimes I can hardly believe it's real." John nodded, leaning on the fence beside her. "I know what you mean, but we've done good, Emily. Your mother would be proud." The mention of her mother no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, Emily felt a warm glow of pride. The investigation into Maria Rodriguez's death had finally brought closure. While Delgado hadn't been directly responsible, his testimony had led to the arrest of a former employee who had caused the accident in an attempt to steal her research. "Did you see the latest article?" John asked, pulling out his tablet. "The American Rodeo Association is considering new guidelines for bull breeding and treatment, based on our program." Emily's eyes widened as she scanned the article. "This is huge, John. If they adopt these guidelines, it could change the entire industry." As they discussed the implications of the article, a truck pulled up the long driveway. Dr. Ramirez stepped out, waving cheerfully as he approached. "Well, if it isn't my two favorite revolutionaries," the old vet chuckled. "How are our gentle giants doing today? See for yourself." Emily grinned, gesturing towards the paddock where Storm and the others grazed contentedly. Dr. Ramirez shook his head in wonder. "I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I never thought I'd see the day. You two have really shaken things up." As they walked towards the barn for Dr. Ramirez's regular checkup of the herd, Emily felt a surge of gratitude for the unexpected family she had found. John, steady and supportive. Dr. Ramirez, a link to her past and a guiding hand in their new venture. And of course, Storm, the bull who had brought them all together. Inside the barn, a new addition to their team was hard at work. Lisa, a young veterinary student who had joined them as an intern, was carefully examining one of the pregnant cows. "How's she looking, Lisa?" John asked. The young woman smiled up at them. "Everything looks great. I think we can expect a new calf within the week." Emily felt a thrill of excitement. This would be the first calf born under their new breeding program, a testament to the success of their gentle genetics approach. As Dr. Ramirez began his examinations, Emily slipped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. She walked to a small hill overlooking the ranch, where a simple stone marker stood. It was a memorial to her mother, placed there when they had scattered some of Maria's ashes on the land where her life's work would continue. "We did it, Mom," Emily whispered, her fingers tracing the engraved words. "Your dream is alive and growing. I hope you can see it." A gentle breeze rustled the grass around her, and for a moment, Emily could almost imagine it was her mother's touch, a silent gesture of approval and love. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her from her reverie. John joined her at the marker, slipping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, leaning into him. "More than okay. I was just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago I was lost, searching for answers. And now you're changing the world," John finished for her. "One bull at a time." Emily laughed, the sound carrying across the Texas landscape. "We're changing the world," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, John." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, John turned to face Emily. His eyes were serious, filled with an emotion that made her heart skip a beat. "Emily," he began, his voice low and earnest, "these past months have been the most incredible of my life. Not just because of the work we're doing, but because of you. You've brought a light into my life that I never knew was missing." Emily's breath caught in her throat as John dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Emily Rodriguez," he said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in life, the way you've been my partner in everything else?" Tears of joy sprang to Emily's eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." As John slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a deep kiss, Emily felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. This was more than just a new chapter in her life. It was the beginning of a whole new story. In the distance, they heard the low, contented bellow of Storm, as if the bull was offering his own approval of their union. Emily and John laughed, their joy echoing across the ranch that had become their home and the foundation of their shared dream. As twilight settled over the Texas landscape, Emily and John walked hand in hand back towards the house, where Dr. Ramirez, Lisa, and the rest of their makeshift family waited to hear the good news. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Emily knew there would be challenges ahead. Changing an entire industry was no small task, and there would always be those who resisted progress. But as she looked at the man beside her, at the ranch that was a testament to their shared vision, and thought of the gentle giants that had brought them together, she knew that they could face anything that came their way. The legacy of Maria Rodriguez lived on, not just in the breeding program that bore her imprint, but in the love, compassion, and determination that Emily carried with her every day. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast Texas sky, Emily Rodriguez, soon to be Emily Hawkins, looked to the future with hope, love, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the gentlest souls could create the most powerful change.